You paid for me, now do it. The rancher did it, and then he had a wife. The sun hung low over the small, dusty town of Redstone, casting long shadows across the wooden buildings that lined the main street. The air smelled faintly of hay and smoke, and the wind carried the occasional clatter of a loose shutter or a distant horse's hooves. People went about their routines, exchanging nods and quiet greetings, but behind the calm facade there was always a sense of something waiting to happen. In towns like this, everyone knew everyone else's business, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. Clara Henderson stood at the edge of the main street, her boots kicking up little clouds of dust as she adjusted the brim of her worn hat. Her eyes, sharp and clear, scanned the crowd with a mixture of determination and caution. She was young, barely 20, but she carried herself with a confidence that seemed older than her years. Life had forced her to grow up quickly, especially after her father's passing left her family in a precarious position. The debts he had left behind hung over them like a dark cloud, and the one person who had the power to change everything now stood just across the street. Ethan Marshall was a man who needed no introduction in Redstone. He was the kind of man whose presence seemed to fill a room even when he was silent. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind, Ethan had earned his wealth and his reputation through years of hard work and unyielding discipline on his ranch. But it wasn't just his skill or his fortune that set him apart. It was the quiet authority in his gaze, the kind that made people listen even when they didn't want to. And today, Clara was about to demand something that would test that authority in ways no one had seen before. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked purposefully toward the rancher's office. The wooden sign above the door creaked as it swayed slightly in the wind, announcing the place simply E. Marshall, Rancher. Inside, the room smelled faintly of leather and tobacco. Maps of pastures and property lines covered the walls, and a large desk dominated the center of the space. Behind it, Ethan looked up from the papers he was reviewing. His sharp eyes immediately focused on her, narrowing slightly with curiosity and something else, caution perhaps, or disbelief. Clara stopped a few feet from the desk, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Mr. Marshall," she began, her voice steady even though her heart beat faster than she cared to admit, "I need you to do what you promised." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but unreadable. He set down his pen and regarded her silently, letting the tension linger. "And what exactly is it that you think I promised, Miss Henderson?" he asked, his tone measured but not unkind. Clara's eyes flashed with determination. "You paid for me, Mr. Park." "Marshall!" "I'm not asking any more, I'm telling you. It's time to make good on your word." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication, and Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. The room seemed smaller, as though the air itself was holding its breath. For a moment, there was silence. Ethan studied her, noting the way she held herself, the way her gaze didn't waver despite the weight of her demand. Most people would have cowered or stumbled over their words, but not Clara. She had inherited her father's stubbornness and her mother's sense of pride, and together they made her a force to be reckoned with. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low but firm. "Miss Henderson, I don't recall making a promise like the one you're speaking of. You need to be careful with words like that." Clara took a step closer, letting her presence fill the room. "I'm very careful with my words, Mr. Pale." "Marshall, my father owed you a debt, and you accepted it. That debt is mine to settle, but I won't settle it the way everyone expects. I won't bow or beg. I want something more, something fair, and I intend to get it. Ethan leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. His gaze softened slightly as he regarded her. Fair, you say? And what is fair in your eyes? Security, protection, a chance to live without being chained by debts I didn't create, she said, her voice firm. You have the power to give me that, and I intend to hold you to it. The room was quiet again, the weight of her words settling between them. Ethan's mind raced, weighing the risks and implications of agreeing to her demand. Redstone was a town built on rules, traditions, and reputations. To step outside of them, even for a good reason, could draw criticism, or worse. Yet there was something about Clara's determination that made him pause. She wasn't just another debtor. She was intelligent, resourceful, and unafraid to speak her mind. And somehow he found himself intrigued by her audacity. After a long pause, Ethan finally nodded slowly. Very well, he said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. We'll do this your way, Miss Henderson. But understand this, whatever path you've chosen will not be easy. There will be challenges, and there will be obstacles. Are you prepared for that? Clara's lips curved into a small, confident smile. I'm ready, Mr. Pa.
Marshall, I've never had a choice, but now I do.
And I won't waste it. The air between them shifted, charged with a mix of tension and possibility. Ethan realized that this wasn't just about debt or obligation anymore. It was about trust, respect, and perhaps even something deeper that neither of them could yet name. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of curiosity about the future, a future that, until now, had been entirely predictable. Outside, the town carried on with its daily routines, unaware of the quiet storm brewing in the rancher's office. Horses whinnied in the distance. A wagon creaked along the wooden planks of the street, and the wind whispered through the trees lining the outskirts of Redstone. But inside, two lives were on the brink of change. A young woman determined to claim her freedom, and a man used to control, who was now facing a challenge unlike any he had encountered before. Clara turned to leave, her steps sure and deliberate. She didn't need to glance back. She knew Ethan would follow through on his word, not just because he had to, but because he respected her enough to see the truth in her eyes. And as the sun dipped lower, casting the town in hues of gold and amber, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. This was the beginning of something that neither Clara nor Ethan could have predicted, a journey that would test their strength, their courage, and ultimately, their hearts. As Clara stepped out of the office and into the dusty street, she felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. For the first time in her life, she had taken control, and the weight of possibility rested squarely on her shoulders. Behind her, Ethan watched quietly, a thoughtful expression settling over his face. He had dealt with many challenges in his life, but this one, this bold, daring, insistent young woman, might be the most interesting of all. The town of Redstone, with its quiet streets and watchful eyes, seemed unchanged. Yet in reality, everything was different. A single conversation, a single demand, had set events into motion that would ripple through the lives of everyone involved. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. Clara Henderson had made her stand, and Ethan Marshall would not forget it. Clara had barely stepped out of Ethan Marshall's office when the first question crossed her mind. What exactly have I just asked him to do? The words had felt heavy on her tongue, yet somehow natural. She had demanded his help, his support, something beyond the simple repayment of debts. She wanted security, freedom, and a chance to reclaim the life her father had promised her. And now, Ethan had agreed. Walking down the dusty street, she could feel the curious eyes of the townspeople on her. Whispers floated from behind closed shutters and doorways. "Did you hear what she said?" one woman murmured. "She told him to do it." The children on the corner stopped their games and peeked, sensing the tension in the air. Clara ignored them all. She had learned long ago that letting the opinions of others dictate her life would get her nowhere. Ethan, meanwhile, was sitting at his desk, looking out the office window at the shrinking figure of Clara Henderson. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and thought about what her request truly meant. He had met many people over the years who owed money or favors, but few had approached him with such clarity, such confidence. Most would have begged or pleaded, but Clara had walked in like she already owned the right to ask. And perhaps, in a way, she did. By the time the sun began to dip behind the hills surrounding Redstone, Clara had made her way back to the small house she shared with her younger brother Tommy and her mother Mary. The house was modest, with wooden floors that creaked and walls that had seen better days, yet inside it felt alive with hope, warmth, and determination. Mary was preparing supper, her hands moving deftly over the vegetables and bread, while Tommy sat at the table, scribbling in a notebook.
"Mother," Clara said, her voice low but firm, "I've spoken to Mr. Marshall."
He agreed to help. Mary's hands paused mid-motion, and she turned to her daughter with a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Help? Clara, what do you mean?" "Do you know what you've done?" Clara smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I asked for more than money. I asked for a chance to live without this debt hanging over us, and he said yes." Tommy's eyes lit up. "You did it, Clara. You actually did it," he exclaimed, nearly knocking over his notebook in his excitement. Mary's face softened, but worry still lingered.
Yes, but understand, Clara, this isn't a simple thing.
"You've made an agreement with a man who has his own ways, his own rules. Be careful. Not everything will be easy, and not everyone will understand." Clara nodded.
"I know, Mother, but I can't let fear control me anymore."
"This is our chance." The next morning, Clara made her way to Ethan's ranch. The sun was rising over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch stretched over vast acres of land, dotted with barns, fences, and grazing cattle. Ethan was already at work, moving among the horses, inspecting fences, and giving quiet instructions to his hands. He paused when he saw Clara approaching, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand.
"You're early," he said, his voice neutral but carrying a note of curiosity. "I don't waste time," Clara replied, smiling faintly.
"I'm ready to get started." Ethan studied her for a moment. She was young, yes, and untested in the ways of ranch work, but there was a determination in her eyes he couldn't ignore. "Very well," he said, "but understand this. The work won't be easy. There's no room for mistakes, and nothing will be handed to you. You'll have to earn it, just like everyone else." Clara nodded. "I expected nothing less." The days that followed were grueling. Ethan introduced Clara to the daily routines of the ranch, feeding the cattle, mending fences, checking water supplies, and riding long distances to inspect the fields. At first, the work overwhelmed her. Her hands blistered, her muscles ached, and the sun burned her skin. But Clara refused to give in. She learned quickly, asking questions when she didn't understand, observing Ethan's methods, and correcting her mistakes with quiet determination. Ethan watched her progress with a mix of surprise and respect. She wasn't just a young woman who had been thrust into an unfamiliar world. She was intelligent, adaptable, and resilient. He found himself giving her more responsibilities, testing her limits to see how far she could go. And each time she rose to the challenge, he felt a growing admiration for her courage. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of broken fencing, Ethan paused to wipe the sweat from his face.
"You're doing better than I expected," he admitted, his tone almost grudgingly approving.
Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I told you, I don't waste time. And I've had to grow up faster than most. Hard work doesn't scare me." There was a moment of quiet between them, filled only by the distant calls of the cattle and the rustling of the wind through the fields. Ethan found himself studying her, noticing the way she moved with purpose, the way her eyes shone with determination. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, but Clara was different. She was full of surprises, and he wasn't sure he was ready for all of them. As the weeks passed, the townspeople began to notice the change. Whispers followed Clara wherever she went, some admiring her courage, others questioning her audacity. She had become a figure of intrigue in Redstone, a young woman who had dared to demand more than what society expected. And through it all, she maintained her composure, never allowing the gossip to shake her focus. Ethan, too, began to change. He had spent years living by rules he set for himself, controlling his land, his workers, and his life with precision. But Clara's presence challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, wondering how she was faring and considering the subtle shifts she had inspired in him. One evening after a long day of work, Ethan invited Clara to sit with him on the porch of his ranch house. The sun was setting, casting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The quiet of the evening was comforting, and for the first time Clara felt a sense of calm amidst the whirlwind of her new life. "You've done well," Ethan said, his voice quiet, almost reflective. "Not many would have held their ground the way you did." Clara looked out at the horizon, taking in the vast expanse of land and sky. "I had to," she replied. "If I didn't, I'd still be living under the shadow of debt and fear. I want more from life than that." Ethan nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You have courage, Clara, and determination. Those are rare qualities, especially in someone so young." "Don't lose them," Clara smiled softly. "I won't. And thank you, Ethan, for giving me this chance. I know it wasn't easy." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to shrink. There was mutual respect, a quiet understanding that neither had expected but both acknowledged. The journey ahead would be difficult, yes, but it was also full of possibility. In the days that followed, Clara continued to prove herself. She took charge of small projects on the ranch, organized supplies, and even began to help manage some of the younger hands. Ethan watched her grow with pride and a growing sense of admiration. The bond between them deepened, not through words of romance, but through shared effort, trust, and the mutual recognition of each other's strengths. By the time the first hints of autumn colored the hills, it was clear that Clara Henderson was no longer just a girl paying off a debt. She was a partner, a force in her own right, and someone who had earned the respect of a man who had seen many come and go. And though the townspeople still whispered and watched, they could no longer deny the truth. Clara was here to stay, and she had the determination to carve out her own place in Redstone. Ethan, too, had changed in subtle ways. He was still the stoic rancher, disciplined and careful, but there was a warmth in his eyes when he looked at Clara, a recognition of the fire she carried and the strength she had inspired in him. And as they worked side by side under the vast open sky, both knew that this was only the beginning. Their journey together was just starting. and neither would be the same by the time it was done. The weeks passed quickly on the Marshall Ranch, and Clara found herself more at home than she could have ever imagined. Every day brought new challenges, mending fences torn by storms, guiding the horses through rugged trails, and checking on the cattle that grazed across the sprawling fields. At first, the work had seemed overwhelming, and there were mornings when her arms ached so much that she could barely lift the water buckets. But each evening, as she wiped the sweat from her brow and watched the sun sink behind the hills, she felt a quiet satisfaction that she had never experienced before. Ethan watched her closely during these days, noting the way she approached every task with determination and care. Unlike most young women in Redstone, Clara didn't shy away from the hard work. She embraced it. She listened to his instructions, observed the methods of the hands, and asked questions when something puzzled her. In turn, Ethan found himself explaining things more carefully than he ever had to anyone else. He realized that teaching Clara wasn't just about showing her the work. It was about trusting her to take responsibility, to learn, and to grow into a role she had never held before. One crisp morning, as the first light of dawn touched the rolling hills, Clara and Ethan set out to inspect the far end of the property. The terrain was rough, dotted with rocks and patches of thick grass, and the path was narrow and winding. Clara walked with a steady pace, keeping up with Ethan's long strides. She admired the landscape, the way the sunlight painted the fields golden, and the distant mountains stood like silent guardians over the land. There was beauty here, yes, but also danger. Loose rocks, hidden holes, and sudden drops could make a misstep costly. "You need to watch your footing here," Ethan said, glancing at her. "One wrong step and you could twist an ankle. Or worse." "I've learned to be careful," Clara replied, "and I've learned to think ahead." "You taught me that." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, though he didn't often show amusement. "You've improved faster than I expected. Most people give up long before they reach this point." Clara shrugged, a small grin forming on her face. "I don't give up easily. I've had to be strong all my life." They continued walking in silence for a while, the only sounds being the crunch of boots on gravel, the distant lowing of cattle, and the whispering wind through the grass. It was in these quiet moments that Clara began to understand the man she had called upon for help. Ethan was strict, disciplined, and often silent, but beneath that stoicism was a careful mind that valued loyalty, honesty, and hard work. And though he rarely spoke of feelings, she could sense the respect he was beginning to feel for her. Their peaceful inspection was interrupted when they came across a section of fencing that had been broken by the recent storm. The wooden posts were splintered, and the wire sagged dangerously. Clara stepped closer, examining the damage. "This will need more than a quick fix," Ethan said, frowning. "If the cattle get out, it could be a disaster."
"I can help," Clara offered immediately.
"I'll start gathering the supplies, and you can show me the best way to repair it." Ethan nodded, appreciating her initiative. Together they worked to reinforce the fence, setting posts into the ground and tightening the wire. It was exhausting labor, but Clara felt a sense of pride with each post that stood firm. As they worked side by side, she realized how much she had grown since she first came to the ranch. She was no longer just a girl seeking help. She was becoming a partner, capable of handling responsibilities and making decisions that affected the land and the animals. By the time the fence was repaired, the sun was high and both of them were tired and covered in dust. Clara wiped her forehead and looked at Ethan, who was inspecting their work with a critical eye. "Good," he said finally. "That should hold. You did well." Clara felt a swell of satisfaction. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Ethan looked at her, his eyes lingering longer than usual. You didn't just follow instructions. You thought ahead, adapted when things went wrong, and didn't complain once. That takes skill and character. The praise warmed her, but she quickly shifted her focus. I still have a lot to learn, she said, and I want to. I want to be able to handle this land, the animals, everything, on my own one day. Ethan's gaze softened and he nodded. You'll get there, Clara. With determination like yours, there's no doubt. As the days turned into weeks, their work continued, and so did the subtle shifts in their relationship. There was mutual respect, a sense of trust, and an unspoken understanding that neither would cross boundaries unnecessarily. But at the same time, they began to notice each other in new ways. The way Clara's eyes lit up when she accomplished something difficult. The way Ethan's steady presence provided reassurance, even in challenging situations. One afternoon, news came that a rival rancher from a neighboring town was attempting to claim part of Ethan's land. The man had been waiting for an opportunity, hoping to take advantage of the busy season and Ethan's focus on repairs. When Clara heard about it, she immediately suggested a plan. "We need to show him that we're prepared," she said, her voice firm. "If we can secure the boundaries and keep our workers alert, he won't have a chance to take anything." Ethan raised an eyebrow, impressed by her quick thinking. "You're right," he admitted. "We'll need to organize the hands, reinforce the fences, and patrol the borders. Are you ready for this?" Clara didn't hesitate. "I am. Let's do it."
The next few days were some of the most challenging Clara had faced. The
early mornings and late nights became the norm as they worked tirelessly to protect the ranch. There were moments of tension, arguments between the hands, exhaustion from long hours, and the constant worry about the rival's next move. Yet through it all, Clara remained steady. She communicated clearly, delegated tasks, and made sure everyone stayed focused. Ethan observed her leadership, his respect for her growing with each passing day. Finally, the rival rancher arrived, expecting to find an easy opportunity. Instead, he was met with a well-organized and prepared ranch-alert workers and a determined young woman who refused to back down. Seeing their readiness, he quickly realized that any attempt to claim the land would be futile. Defeated, he left without incident, and the threat was neutralized. Clara turned to Ethan, wiping her brow and smiling. "We did it," she said, a mix of relief and pride in her voice. Ethan nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "Yes, we did. And you played a big part in it. You handled yourself well out there." That evening, as the sun set over the hills, Clara reflected on the challenges she had faced. She had come to the ranch seeking security and freedom, but what she had found was something more. She had discovered her own strength, her ability to lead, and her capacity to face difficult situations without fear. Ethan, too, sat quietly on the porch, thinking about the changes he had seen in Clara and in himself. Her presence had shifted the rhythm of the ranch, bringing a new energy, new ideas, and a fresh perspective. He realized that he valued her not just for her abilities, but for the person she was becoming, strong, independent, and courageous. In the following weeks, life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. There were still challenges, of course, storms, work delays, and the ever-present need to care for the land and animals, but Clara faced them with growing confidence. She had earned the respect of the ranch hands, and even the townspeople began to see her in a new light. No longer was she the girl struggling under her father's debts. She was a capable, determined young woman, shaping her own destiny with every decision she made. Ethan noticed it too. The initial tension that had marked their first encounters had transformed into a quiet partnership. They communicated without unnecessary words, relied on each other's strengths, and shared in the small victories and challenges of everyday life. There was a bond forming built on trust, mutual respect, and the recognition of each other's character. One evening, as Clara prepared dinner in the small kitchen, she paused to think about how far she had come. She had entered Ethan's office with nothing but a demand and a determination to change her life. Now she was here, standing on solid ground, shaping her future, and learning lessons she would carry for the rest of her life. And somewhere in the distance, Ethan was watching, thinking the same thing, that this young woman, bold and resilient, had changed more than just the ranch. She had changed him too. Autumn had settled fully over Redstone, painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson. The air was crisp in the mornings, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. The days were shorter now, and the ranch required more careful attention as the changing weather threatened to slow down their work. Clara had grown stronger and more confident with each passing day, but she quickly learned that life on the ranch could never be predictable. Just as soon as things seemed steady, a challenge would appear to test her resolve. One morning, as Clara was inspecting the northern pasture, a frantic voice called out from the barn. She dropped her tools and ran toward the sound, her heart beating fast. Ethan was already there, his expression serious as he met her gaze. "There's trouble," he said, his voice low. "A wildfire has started near the western hills. The wind is strong, and if it spreads, it could reach the ranch." Clara felt a surge of fear, but she pushed it down. She had faced storms, broken fences, and cattle on the loose before. She could handle this, too. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady. Ethan quickly outlined the plan. "We need to protect the barns and the livestock. You take the hands and secure the animals in the eastern pens. I'll handle the fire lines and make sure it doesn't jump the main fences. Move quickly and stay safe." Clara nodded and ran to gather the ranch hands. There was no time for hesitation. The wind had picked up, carrying smoke and embers across the hills. The animals were restless, sensing the danger, and the hands were nervous, unsure of how the fire would behave. Clara took charge, organizing the efforts calmly and efficiently. She gave clear instructions, moved quickly between groups, and reassured the workers, her voice carrying authority and confidence. Hours passed in a blur of heat, smoke, and adrenaline. Clara worked tirelessly, guiding the animals, moving supplies, and coordinating the efforts of everyone on the ranch. She could feel the sweat soaking her clothes, her lungs burning from the smoke, but she refused to stop. She couldn't. Too much was at stake. Ethan, meanwhile, was battling the fire from another angle, cutting fire lines and ensuring the flames didn't spread toward the main buildings. Every so often, he checked on Clara from a distance, amazed at her courage and skill under pressure. She wasn't just surviving the fire, she was leading, making decisions that saved both animals and property. By late afternoon, the fire was finally under control. The worst had passed, and though the ranch had suffered some minor damage, the main buildings and livestock were safe. Clara collapsed onto a wooden crate, breathing heavily, her face streaked with soot and sweat. Ethan approached her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You did well," he said quietly. "Better than I could have expected. He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm proud of you." Clara looked up at him, exhausted but satisfied. "We did it together," she said. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Ethan nodded, though a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "True, but you led well, Clara. You've grown so much since the day you first came to this ranch." The events of that day marked a turning point in their relationship. Before, they had worked side by side with respect and cautious trust. Now, there was something deeper, an unspoken understanding and admiration that neither could deny. Clara realized that Ethan valued her not only for her abilities but for her courage, her determination, and her heart. And Ethan realized that Clara was more than a young woman seeking help. She was his equal in strength and spirit. In the days that followed, the ranch began to recover from the fire. Fences were repaired, burned patches of grass were replanted, and the animals were checked carefully for injuries. Through it all, Clara continued to show leadership and initiative. She organized teams to repair the damage, ensured everyone had enough food and water, and even helped plan strategies to prevent future incidents. Her confidence grew, and Ethan watched with quiet admiration as she took on responsibilities that few others could manage. But life on the ranch wasn't just about work. There were moments of quiet reflection and connection. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Ethan and Clara sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the air was calm for the first time in days. "You've changed a lot," Ethan said, his voice soft. "Since you first came here, you've become stronger, smarter, and more capable." I didn't expect it." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "I had to change. I can't go back to being the girl who was afraid of everything. I needed to prove to myself that I could handle life on my own. And that includes challenges like today." Ethan nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "You've proved more than that. You've proved that you can lead, make decisions, and face danger without hesitation. That's rare. Very rare." There was a silence after that, but it was comfortable, not awkward. Both of them were aware of the bond growing between them, though neither spoke directly of feelings. It was enough to know that they trusted and respected each other, and that trust was stronger than words. However, the peace didn't last long. A few days later, news arrived that a severe storm was approaching from the north. Rain, hail, and strong winds threatened to flood the pastures and damage the ranch buildings. Clara and Ethan immediately prepared for the storm, reinforcing structures, securing animals, and making sure supplies were safe. The storm hit with full force the next morning. Rain poured down in sheets, wind tore through the trees, and thunder shook the earth. The animals were frightened, and some tried to break free. Clara moved among them, calming them with soft words, guiding them to shelter, and working tirelessly to ensure no one was harmed. Ethan was right beside her, cutting away fallen branches and securing fences, his face determined and focused. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. Clara's clothes were soaked, her hands raw from work, and her body exhausted, yet she didn't stop. She couldn't. The safety of the ranch and the animals depended on her. Ethan noticed her struggle and moved closer, offering a steadying hand and quiet encouragement. "You're doing well," he said. "Keep going. We'll get through this." Clara nodded, grateful for his support. Together, they worked through the storm, coordinating efforts and ensuring everyone was safe. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch drenched but intact. The sky cleared, revealing a rainbow stretching across the hills, a symbol of hope and renewal. Exhausted but relieved, Clara and Ethan stood together, surveying the ranch. The past few days had been some of the hardest they had faced, but they had overcome every challenge through teamwork, trust, and determination. "You handled yourself brilliantly," Ethan said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I've seen many people face storms, fire, and disaster, but few with the courage and calm you've shown." Clara smiled tiredly. "I've had good teachers," she replied, "and I've had no choice but to keep going. I've learned that the only way to survive and grow is to face challenges head on. Ethan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. You've grown in ways I couldn't have imagined. You're no longer just the girl who came to settle a debt. You're a partner in every sense of the word. The words warmed Clara, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she looked at the horizon, feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride. She had faced danger, hardship, and exhaustion, and had emerged stronger. She realized that her journey on the ranch was not just about earning security, it was about discovering her own strength, resilience, and potential. That night, as the ranch settled into quiet, Clara reflected on everything that had happened. She had come to Ethan Marshall seeking help, and in the process, she had found courage, purpose, and a partnership built on trust and respect. And though the challenges were far from over, she knew that with determination and the support of someone who believed in her, she could face anything. Ethan, in his own thoughts, recognized that the girl he had first met, bold and determined, had become someone extraordinary. Her courage had inspired him, her intelligence had impressed him, and her strength had earned his deepest respect. He realized that this partnership was no longer just about debts or work. It was about two people learning from and supporting each other, growing together through life's trials. And so, as the night settled over the hills of Redstone, the ranch stood strong, a testament to their perseverance. Clara and Ethan had faced fire, storms, and uncertainty, and they had emerged stronger, more capable, and more connected than ever. The challenges they faced had tested their courage, their skill, and their hearts, and they had passed together as partners. Winter was approaching Redstone, and the hills were dusted with the first hints of snow. The air was cold, crisp, and smelled faintly of wood smoke from the chimneys of the town. On the Marshall Ranch, life had settled into a steady rhythm. Clara had grown more confident than ever. Her skills on the ranch matched only by her courage and determination. She had faced fire, storms, and rival threats, and each challenge had strengthened her resolve. She had also learned something deeper. She was no longer just a girl under debt. She was a capable, independent woman shaping her own destiny. Ethan observed her from the porch one morning, the rising sun casting warm light over the ranch. She was checking the horses, moving from one stall to another with practiced ease. Watching her, he felt a quiet pride he rarely allowed himself to show. It wasn't just that she had proven herself capable. It was that she had become part of the heart of the ranch. She had earned a place not by being owed, but by being strong, intelligent, and steadfast. Clara looked up and caught his gaze. She smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and mischief in her eyes. "Morning, Ethan," she said. "Morning," he replied, straightening from his chair. "You've been busy already, I see." Clara chuckled softly. "I don't waste time. There's always something that needs attention here." He nodded, watching her for a moment before speaking again. "You've come a long way. I think even the hands respect your leadership now." She smiled, a quiet glow of satisfaction in her chest. "It took time. I had to earn it, just like you said." That day, the ranch faced a final test, a surprise inspection from the town council. They had heard of the improvements, the work ethic, and the way Clara had helped Ethan during the recent challenges, and they decided to see for themselves how the ranch was managed. The council's visit brought tension. While the ranch was secure and thriving, Clara knew that first impressions mattered, and the council was known for being strict and precise. Ethan approached her as they prepared the ranch. "I'll let you take the lead on this. Show them what you've accomplished," he said, his voice steady. Clara nodded, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. "I will," she replied. The council arrived in the early afternoon, their carriage kicking up dust along the main road. They were met at the gate by Clara, who greeted them with calm confidence. She led them through the barns, past the livestock, and to the fields that had been repaired after the storms and fire. She spoke clearly and knowledgeably about the work that had been done, the improvements made, and the plans for the future. She answered questions calmly, never faltering, and even demonstrated her hands-on skills with the livestock and equipment. Ethan watched from a distance, quietly proud. Clara had taken charge, representing the ranch not as someone who owed a debt, but as someone who had earned respect through effort, intelligence, and courage. The council members exchanged impressed glances, nodding at her explanations and examining the work carefully. By the time the inspection ended, the council was visibly pleased. One member even commented, "This young woman has done an exceptional job. She clearly knows this land and has the skill and judgment to manage it well." She had faced so many challenges, and now she stood recognized not just for her work, but for the strength and character she had shown throughout the journey. Ethan approached her, his face calm but with a subtle smile. "You did well," he said quietly. "Better than I ever could have imagined." Clara looked at him, her eyes meeting his. "We did well together," she replied. The council departed, leaving the ranch quiet once more. That evening, as the sky glowed pink and purple with the setting sun, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch, drinking warm tea and reflecting on all that had happened.
"You've changed the way I see things," Ethan said finally, his voice thoughtful. "I've always relied on myself, on rules, and on routines.
But you've shown me that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes it's courage and heart that matter most." Clara's cheeks flushed slightly, but she smiled. "And you've shown me that guidance and experience can make a big difference. I couldn't have done this alone." There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that comes when two people understand each other deeply. For the first time, Clara realized that her journey had brought more than security and independence. It had brought partnership, respect, and a connection that neither words nor deeds alone could fully express. In the following weeks, life on the ranch continued with steady routine, but there was a subtle shift in the air. Ethan and Clara shared more moments together, not as employer and worker, but as equals, navigating challenges side by side. They laughed, discussed plans for future improvements, and even shared quiet evenings by the fire, talking about dreams, hopes, and small victories. One crisp evening, as snowflakes began to fall lightly over the hills, Ethan led Clara to the barn, where the animals were already secured for the night. The air was calm, and the world seemed to pause under the gentle snowfall. He took her hands in his eyes meeting hers with a steady warmth she had come to trust and admire. "Clara," he began, his voice soft but firm, "we've faced fire, storms, and every challenge that came our way. You've grown stronger, braver, and more remarkable than I could have imagined. I want you by my side, not just on the ranch, but in life. Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and joy filling her heart. She had never expected this moment, though she had long felt a connection with Ethan that went beyond work or respect. Tears of happiness formed as she nodded.
"Yes, Ethan, I will." The days that followed were filled with preparations for a simple wedding on the ranch.
The townspeople, once skeptical of Clara's boldness, now celebrated her courage and determination. Friends, family, and workers gathered to witness the union of two people who had faced adversity, grown together, and built something lasting from trust, respect, and shared effort. On the morning of the wedding, the ranch was alive with activity. Horses were groomed, flowers were arranged, and the scent of fresh pine and evergreens filled the air. Clara wore a simple, elegant dress, her hair braided with small flowers she had picked herself. Ethan stood tall, dressed in a clean, crisp suit, his eyes never leaving her as she approached. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows, not just of love, but of partnership, respect, and commitment to face life's challenges together. As they held hands and looked into each other's eyes, there was a quiet understanding that their journey, full of hardships, lessons, and growth, had brought them here, stronger and closer than ever. After the ceremony, the celebration continued with a warm meal, music, and laughter. Clara and Ethan moved among the guests, sharing smiles, handshakes, and stories of their journey. The ranch hands, who had come to respect Clara as much as Ethan, toasted to her courage and dedication. The townspeople, who had once whispered and doubted, now celebrated her as a woman who had earned her place and her future. As evening fell, the newlyweds stood together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the stars twinkle over the hills. Snowflakes continued to drift softly from the sky, and the world seemed peaceful and perfect. Clara leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence and the quiet strength of their bond. "We've come a long way," she said softly, her voice filled with contentment. Ethan nodded, holding her close. "Yes, we have. And this is only the beginning. Together, there's nothing we can't face." The Marshall Ranch, once threatened by debt, fire, storms, and doubt, now stood as a testament to perseverance, courage, and partnership. Clara and Ethan had built more than a ranch. They had built a life together, founded on respect, trust, and love. The challenges they had faced had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately brought them closer than they could have imagined. As the first snow of winter covered the hills and fields in a soft white blanket, Clara and Ethan looked toward the future with hope, determination, and hearts full of gratitude. Their journey had been difficult, but it had led to something greater than either had anticipated: a partnership, a home, and a love that was strong, enduring, and true. And so, under the quiet winter sky of Redstone, the Marshall Ranch thrived, and two lives intertwined forever, each stronger, braver, and more complete than they had been alone.